My daughter asked me a question when she was 7 years old, and I have never found a satisfying way to answer it. We were at my parents' house. Christmas morning. The living room was warm and loud with the particular chaos of that many children in one space. Wrapping paper everywhere, ribbons on the carpet, the smell of my mother's coffee from the kitchen mixing with pine from the tree. Across the room, my brother's kids were tearing into boxes. His oldest, Marcus, had gotten a new gaming console, the one that had been sold out everywhere, the one parents had been camping outside stores to find. His youngest, a girl named Chloe, was sitting on a bicycle with a silver bow on the handlebars, her feet not quite touching the floor, grinning with all her teeth. My daughter, Nora, was holding a small gift bag. She had already opened it. Inside was a sweater, nice enough, the right color, the wrong size, and a card with $20. She was polite about it. She said thank you to my mother, who was watching Marcus set up his console from across the room. My mother said, of course, sweetheart, without turning around. Nora came and stood next to me. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just watched her cousins, the way children watch things they're trying to understand. Then she looked up at me. Dad, she said. Yeah. She thought about it for a second, like she was choosing the words carefully, the way kids do when they're asking something they're not sure they're allowed to ask. Did Grandma forget about me? I have replayed that sentence more times than I can count, not because of what it asked, but because of what it assumed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't accusatory. She had constructed the most generous possible explanation for what she was seeing, that it was an oversight, a mistake, something that could be fixed, and she was asking me to confirm it. I said no, of course not. Grandma loves you. She nodded and went back to her spot near the tree. She didn't look convinced. I don't think I looked convinced either. And I stood there in my parents' living room, holding a glass of eggnog I wasn't drinking, watching my mother laugh at something Marcus had said on the other side of the room. And I thought, how did we get here? To explain that, I need to go back. My brother's name is Kevin. He is 4 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, the emotional weather of our family organized itself around him. Not dramatically. My parents weren't the kind of people who made it obvious, or who would have recognized it if you named it. They thought of themselves as fair, even-handed, loving. But there is a particular kind of favoritism that operates beneath the level of the deliberate. It lives in attention rather than resources. In whose stories get told at dinner, whose setbacks get the longest conversations, whose choices get the most enthusiasm. My father could spend 20 minutes on the phone with Kevin discussing a career decision that Kevin ultimately didn't make. My own promotions got an asterisk that's great, son, and a subject change. I had accepted this, the way you accept the weather. It was just the climate I lived in. Kevin had always been easier, sunnier. He had my father's social ease and my mother's instinct for making people feel included, and people were drawn to him in the way that some people simply are without effort, without apparent awareness of it. He wasn't unkind to me. We were never close in the way some brothers are, but we weren't estranged. We showed up to the same holidays and occasionally texted, and that was the shape of it. When Kevin got married, my parents planned an elaborate rehearsal dinner. When I got married, they attended the wedding, and my mother cried at the ceremony, and my father gave a toast that was warm and a little short. I told myself the difference was Kevin's wife, Diane, who had a large family and strong opinions about celebrations. I told myself a lot of things. Kevin and Diane had their first child, Marcus, 2 years before Nora was born. And something happened in my parents that I didn't fully understand until it was too late to matter. I noticed it first in photos. My parents had always had family photos around the house, the usual arrangement of school portraits and holiday snapshots, and the occasional framed vacation moment. After Marcus was born, a new category emerged. My mother began collecting photos of him the way some people collect evidence. His first bath, his first solid food, his face at every conceivable angle and in every conceivable light. These weren't casual snapshots. They were printed and framed and displayed on surfaces that had previously held other things. By the time Marcus was 1, my parents' refrigerator was a shrine. I told myself this was normal. Grandparents and grandchildren, it was supposed to look like this. Then Chloe was born, 18 months after Marcus. And then Kevin and Diane had a third, a boy named Theo. Small and serious, born with an expression like he was already skeptical about the whole arrangement. My parents practically moved into Kevin's house. That's an exaggeration, but not by much. They babysat 3 or 4 days a week. They took Marcus to his soccer games on Saturday mornings every Saturday with the commitment of people who had found their purpose. They planned vacations, the beach, a theme park, a long weekend at a cabin that were built around Kevin's family's schedule. My mother sent me photos from these trips sometimes, with captions like Marcus loved the roller coaster asterisk and Theo's first time seeing the ocean asterisk. I liked the photos. I said they were great. I was trying to get pregnant with my wife, Jess. She found that out in March. We told my parents in April. My mother said she was thrilled. My father said they'd be there every step of the way. Nora arrived the following January. My wife noticed before I did. She is better at seeing patterns than I am. She's an analyst by profession, and she brings a certain systematic quality to observation that I tend not to. Where I look at individual events and find individual explanations, she looks at the shape of things over time. They visited 4 times, she said, when Nora was about 8 months old. That seems about right, I said. They're busy. In 8 months, they've been to Kevin's house. She paused like she was deciding whether to continue. I'm not going to count, but it's a lot more than 4. I said Kevin lived closer. 15 minutes. Still, she didn't say anything else. She put Nora down for her nap and came back and made tea and sat across from me with the expression she wore when she was waiting for me to catch up. I didn't want to catch up, not yet. There's a particular negotiation that happens inside a person when the evidence is pointing somewhere they don't want to go. You develop a sophisticated system of alternative explanations. You don't lie to yourself exactly. You just keep finding reasons why this particular data point doesn't count, why this one is different, why if you look at it from a slightly different angle it's not what it looks like. I was very good at that system. I had been practicing it my whole life. They're going to get better, I said. Jess wrapped her hands around her mug. Okay, she said. She didn't argue. She just kept watching. By the time Nora was 3, the pattern had a shape. Marcus's birthdays were events. My parents arrived with balloons and wrapped presents and stayed most of the day. For Chloe's 5th birthday, they rented a space at a local park and my mother made a custom cake. She had never made a custom cake for anything in my memory, but there it was, pink and elaborate, photographed from 6 angles. Nora's 3rd birthday, a card. A gift card to a children's store, thoughtful in theory, impersonal in practice. My parents came for an hour, during which my father watched the game on his phone, and my mother asked twice whether Kevin's kids might be stopping by. They were not stopping by. Nora didn't notice. She was 3. She was happy with her balloons and her cake that Jess and I had made the night before. Flour on the counter. Nora asleep upstairs while we frosted it in pink, because it was her favorite color that week. But I noticed, and Jess noticed me noticing, and she didn't say anything, because she understood that what I needed at that particular moment was not to be told I was right. What I needed was to keep believing it wasn't as bad as it looked. The summer Nora turned 5, my parents took Kevin's kids to the beach. A full week, a rental house on the coast. My mother sent me a photo of Marcus and Chloe and Theo building a sandcastle, all 3 of them sunburned and laughing. Kevin and Diane in the background, holding drinks, visibly relaxed. I mentioned to my mother, on the phone, that Nora loved the beach. My mother said, "Oh, we'll have to take her sometime." The tone was the tone of a person, making a note they will not follow up on. I knew that tone. I had heard it my entire life, aimed at me, whenever I expressed something that wasn't immediately convenient. I said, "Sure, Mom, sounds good." I hung up and sat on the back porch for a while. Nora was inside, doing a puzzle with Jess. I could hear them through the screen door, the small plastic click of pieces, Nora saying this one with the urgency children bring to puzzles. Jess saying, "Try it and see." I thought about the way my mother had said asterisk sometime. I thought about Marcus at his soccer games, my parents on the sideline every Saturday. I thought about the beach rental, and I thought she doesn't see Nora the same way. I didn't know what to do with that, so I went inside and helped with the puzzle. The school play was in November. Nora's class was doing a production of a story about animals and seasons, the kind of charmingly chaotic performance that schools put on, with handmade costumes and children who either freeze under stage lights or decide to improvise. Nora had a small speaking part. 6 lines, maybe 7. She had practiced them for 2 weeks, in the living room, in the bath, at the dinner table, looking at whoever was available with the particular focused intensity she brought to things she cared about. She had written my parents' names on a piece of paper and given it to me. "Can you call Grandma?" she said, "so she can come." I called. My mother said, of course. She said she would not miss it. We saved 2 seats, 3rd row, left of center. The gymnasium filled up. Kids assembled backstage. The lights went down. The 2 seats beside us stayed empty. I kept thinking they'll be here. Traffic, parking, there's always something. Nora's part came in the second act. She walked onto the stage in her costume. She was a rabbit, white ears, a nose she'd drawn on herself with face paint that morning. And she found us in the audience immediately. She found us the way kids always find their parents, that unerring instinct, even in a dark and crowded room. Her eyes moved to the empty seats. Just for a second, then she looked back at us, at me and Jess, and she smiled and said her lines. Every one of them in the right order, loudly enough to be heard. She was wonderful. In the car afterward, she was quiet for a few minutes. Then she said, "Grandma didn't come." "No," I said. "She said she would." "I know." Another silence, the kind that has weight. "Did something happen to her?" she asked. "Is she okay?" This was Nora. Even at 6, her first response to disappointment was concern for the other person. "She's okay," I said. "There was something with Uncle Kevin's son, a soccer thing. I don't know why I told her that. I should have left it vague. But it was the truth, and I was tired, and I told it." Nora processed this. "Oh," she said. Then she looked out the window. She didn't cry. She never cried easily, even then. She just went somewhere interior for a while, and then she came back and asked if we could stop for hot chocolate, and I said yes. I called my mother that night. She apologized. She said it had been a last-minute thing. She said she would make it up to Nora. I said okay. I did not say what I was thinking, which was, she saved her seat. She wrote your name on a piece of paper. She practiced those lines for 2 weeks, and she looked for you in the dark. I didn't say any of that. I said goodnight, and I put the phone down, and I went and stood outside for a while in the cold. The Christmas I described at the beginning of this story happened the following month. We arrived at my parents' house mid-morning. Kevin and Diane and the kids were already there. They always arrived first, always settled in like it was their house, and we were the guests, which was not something anyone said out loud, but which had the quality of a fact everyone had simply agreed to. The living room was full. My parents had outdone themselves that year. The tree was enormous, the presents arranged beneath it with the abundance of people who had saved and planned. Kevin's kids moved through the room like they owned it, which in some emotional sense I suppose they did. Nora held my hand when we walked in. She was wearing a red dress that she had picked out herself. She had been excited about this day for weeks. She saw her cousins pile immediately. Children are very good at surveying a room. It takes them about 4 seconds to understand the geometry of a situation. I watched her do it, the quick, quiet inventory, the comparison she could not make. Then she found her gift bag, small and cheerful near the base of the tree. She opened it while I watched. The sweater, the card, the $20 inside. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up and across the room and watched Chloe wobble happily on her bicycle, and Marcus tear the packaging off his console, and Theo sit in my father's lap while my father pointed at something on Theo's new tablet. My mother was nearby, laughing, one hand on Marcus's shoulder. Nora came to stand beside me. I had already told you what she said. Did Grandma forget about me? I put my arm around her. I told her no. Of course not. She leaned into me for a second. Then she went to find a spot to sit, near the edge of the room, and she watched her cousins with an expression that was careful and closed in a way that no 7-year-old's face should be. I looked at my mother. She was still laughing at something Marcus had said. She hadn't heard the question. She had no idea it had been asked. And I stood there in my parents' living room and felt something shift inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet structural movement, the way old buildings settle. Something that had been held in place for a long time, held by explanation and patience, and the particular willingness I had always had to find reasons why things were not what they looked like. That thing let go. I didn't say anything, not that day. I smiled when I was expected to smile. I helped with dinner. I let my father pour me a glass of wine, and I made appropriate conversation, and I watched Nora sit at the kids' table with her cousins, polite and contained, eating her food without complaint. But on the drive home, after Nora had fallen asleep in the backseat, I told Jess what had happened. What Nora had asked. Jess looked at the road for a long moment. "Okay," she said quietly. "What do you want to do?" For the first time, I didn't say I think things will get better. "I don't know yet," I said. But I did know. I just needed a little more time to accept it. I asked for a family meeting in January. Not a confrontation, I didn't want to call it that, even in my own head, because confrontation implied I was looking for a fight, and I wasn't. I was looking for an acknowledgement. Some small recognition that what was happening was real, and that it could be different. I called my mother on a Wednesday evening, and I said that Jess and I would like to sit down with her and Dad, just the four of us, to talk about some things. She said, of course. She said, was everything all right? I said yes, everything was fine, I just wanted to talk. We went on a Saturday afternoon. Kevin was not supposed to be there. He was there. He was in the kitchen when we arrived, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee, and he looked at us with the particular ease of a person who has been briefed. My mother said, "Oh, Kevin stopped by, I hope that's okay." Jess looked at me. I said, "Sure." We sat in the living room, my parents on the couch, Kevin in the armchair, me and Jess on the love seat. I had thought about how to begin. I had written some things down, actually, not a script, just a list. The school play, the birthday cards, the beach trip, the Christmas morning. I had the list in my jacket pocket, and I didn't take it out. I said, "I want to talk about the kids." My father nodded, attentive. "I've noticed a pattern over the past few years," I said, "and I've been putting off saying something because I didn't want to make it into a bigger thing than it needed to be. But Nora is getting older. She's starting to notice things, and I think we need to talk about it." My mother said, "What kind of pattern?" I told her. I was specific. I named dates and events. Marcus's birthdays, the ones my parents had shown up to with balloons and stayed for hours. Nora's birthdays, the cards, the school play, the beach trip, Christmas morning, the gift bag. I kept my voice even. I was not accusing them of anything, I said. I was describing what I had observed. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then my mother said, "I think you're being a little unfair." I had expected this. I had prepared for it. "Okay," I said. "Help me understand where I'm wrong." Marcus and Chloe and Theo. We see them more because Kevin lives closer. 15 minutes, Jess said, quietly, just the fact. My mother glanced at her. "And they've needed more help." Diane went back to work when Theo was young and Kevin was traveling for work. "We asked you to babysit twice," I said. "You were busy both times." "We weren't," she stopped, started again. "We try to be fair." "Mom," I kept my voice gentle. "The school play. Nora had a part, she saved you seats. She was looking for you in the audience." My mother looked down at her hands. "That was a difficult week," she said. "Marcus had a tournament." "It was a soccer practice," I said. "It wasn't even a game." Kevin shifted in the armchair. I looked at him. He had the expression of a man who had walked into something and was deciding how to handle it. "I think," he said, "you might be reading into things a bit." "Kevin, I'm serious." His voice was easy, measured. The voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "Mom and Dad love Nora. They love all the grandkids. But you're sitting here with this list of grievances and you're making it sound like—" "I'm not making it sound like anything. I'm telling you what happened. Kids get different gifts at different ages, different experiences. That's not favoritism, that's just—" She asked me if Grandma forgot about her. I said it plainly. No emphasis, just the sentence. Kevin stopped. My father, who had been quiet through all of it, looked at the floor. "She's 7 years old," I said. "And that's the question she asked me on Christmas morning." The room was quiet again. My mother said, "We'll do better." She meant it. I believed that she meant it in the moment. I think she did mean it. The way people mean things when they are in the room with the consequence of their choices, and the feeling is acute and real. "I hope so," I said. We drove home mostly quiet. At a red light, Jess reached over and put her hand on my knee. "You did well," she said. "Do you think anything will change?" She took her hand back, watched the light. "I think they believe they'll change," she said. What happened instead was the rewriting. It started within the week. My mother called my father's sister, who called me, who told me my mother was upset that I had ambushed her, that I had brought a list, that I had been accusatory. I had not brought a list. I had kept it in my pocket. Kevin called me on a Tuesday. He was friendly, the way he always was, that disarming warmth that made everything he said sound like concern. "I just want to check in," he said. "You seemed really stressed at Mom and Dad's." I wasn't stressed. I was making a point. Right. A pause. I worry sometimes that you've got this narrative in your head about how things are and it's coloring how you see everything. Mom and Dad love Nora, you know that. I'm not questioning whether they love her. Then what are you questioning? How they show it. Or don't." Another pause, shorter. "I think," he said carefully, "that having kids is hard, and comparing kids is hard. And I think you might be making Nora feel like she's in competition with my kids, and that's not fair to her." I had to sit with that for a second, because it was cleverly done. He had taken my concern and reversed it, made me the source of Nora's discomfort, made my noticing the problem into the problem itself. She's not in competition with your kids, I said. She just wants her grandparents to show up. They show up. Kevin, the school play. One time. It's not one time. I stopped, breathed. It's a pattern, and I'm not going to pretend I don't see it. He went quiet for a moment. Then, I think you should talk to someone professionally. I'm not saying that to be mean. I genuinely think there's something going on with you that isn't about mom and dad. I said thank you for calling. I hung up. For about 3 days after that, I turned it over. I went back through the events I had described, and I looked at them from the angle Kevin had offered, and I tried to see if he was right. Maybe I was making it into something. Maybe I was mapping my own childhood onto Nora's experience. Maybe the gift bag at Christmas had just been a gift bag. On the third night, I was sitting at the kitchen table when Jess came in and put her phone down in front of me. "Look at this," she said. On the screen was a spreadsheet. Jess had been keeping records for 2 years. That was the thing about her I had always relied on without fully understanding. She saw patterns, and when she saw a pattern she didn't like, she documented it. Not obsessively, she wasn't building a case, she told me. She was just keeping track in the quiet, methodical way she kept track of everything important. She had a folder on her phone. The spreadsheet had dates, events, what had been promised and what had happened. What Kevin's kids had received versus what Nora had received at birthdays and holidays and ordinary occasions. There were screenshots, text messages from my mother, including one where she said she would absolutely be at the school play, sent 4 days before she missed it. There were photos I hadn't known Jess had taken at Christmas, the gift receipts she'd kept when Nora's presents arrived, a note about the beach house my parents rented that summer. She had screenshots of Instagram. My mother's account, mostly, photos of Kevin's kids, tagged and captioned with a warmth and detail that her occasional photos of Nora did not have. I scrolled through it for a long time. "Why didn't you show me this before?" I said. "You weren't ready before," she said it without judgment. "You needed to try it your way first." I looked at the screenshot of my mother's text. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The play sounds adorable. I thought about Nora in her rabbit ears, scanning the dark gymnasium. "What do I do with this?" I said. "Whatever you think is right," she said, "but now you have it." I didn't call my parents. I didn't send the spreadsheet to Kevin. I just sat with it for a while. The particular feeling of being handed evidence of something you already knew but couldn't prove, it isn't satisfying exactly. It's more like the end of a kind of loneliness. The loneliness of being the only person in the room who can see what you're seeing. Jess had seen it too. She had seen it for 2 years and said nothing until I was ready. I reached across the table and took her hand. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. The change was not dramatic. I didn't issue an ultimatum. I didn't make a speech. I simply began making different choices about how much access my parents had to Nora's life. And I made those choices quietly, the way you reroute around something without announcing the detour. We stopped going to my parents' house when Kevin's family was there. I told my mother we found those gatherings a little overwhelming for Nora, which was true in a way that didn't require elaboration. We began spending holidays differently, sometimes at Jess's parents', who lived an hour away and who loved Nora with a completeness that still occasionally surprised me. Sometimes just the 3 of us, which turned out to be its own kind of gift. My parents still saw Nora. I wasn't cutting them off. I wasn't punishing anyone, or not only that. I was just protecting a perimeter, choosing where Nora spent her emotional energy and with whom. And something happened. Nora got lighter. I noticed it over months, not days. She laughed more easily. She stopped doing the thing she'd been doing at family gatherings, that careful, contained watching from the edge of the room. She asked about her cousins sometimes, the way kids ask about people they know without being close to, and I answered the questions, and that was that. She started a new thing that year, a drawing class at the community center on Saturday mornings. She came home every week with something, animals, landscapes, strange, abstract shapes she gave elaborate names. She taped them to the wall in her room until the wall was covered. One Saturday she came home and handed me a drawing before she even took her coat off. "It's us," she said. It was, recognizably in the way a child's drawing is recognizable. The heights roughly right, the details chosen according to some interior logic. Me and Jess and Nora in front of a house, all 3 of us with large circular hands. The sun was yellow and enormous. I put it on the refrigerator. Later that night, after she was asleep, I stood in the kitchen looking at it. I thought, this is what she sees when she thinks about her family. Not the extended version, not the gathering at my parents' house. This. The 3 of us. She was fine. More than fine. I had been so focused on what she was missing that I had not fully absorbed what she had. Kevin moved 18 months later. His company offered him a position in another city, a significant one, money and title, and the kind of opportunity that reorganizes a life. He took it. He and Diane and the kids relocated in June to a place 4 states away, and my parents drove out to help with the move and spent a week there and came back quieter than they'd left. My mother called me more often after that. I noticed the shift but did not comment on it. She asked about Nora with a specificity she hadn't had before, what grade she was in, what she liked, whether she was still doing the drawing class. I answered the questions. I kept the calls at a comfortable length. She started asking to visit. We arranged it, a Saturday afternoon lunch at our house. My mother brought flowers and a gift for Nora, a set of nice colored pencils, the kind for serious drawing, not the cheap ones from the drugstore. She'd asked me what Nora was into. She'd actually asked. Nora was polite. She said thank you. She showed my mother some of her drawings, standing a little apart, not quite leaning in. My mother looked at them with what seemed like genuine attention. "You're very talented," she said. Nora said thank you again. After my parents left, I asked Nora what she thought. She considered it for a moment, the way she considered things now. She was 11, and she had developed a quality of interior deliberation that I recognized and loved. "She's different," Nora said. "How do you mean?" "I don't know." She picked up one of the pencils from the new set, turned it over in her hands. She seemed like she was trying. "Does that feel good?" Another pause. "It feels kind of late," she said. Then she went back to her drawing. My father had a health scare 2 years after Kevin moved away. Nothing catastrophic, a cardiac event, caught early, a procedure, a recovery that took several months. I drove out 3 weekends in a row during that period. I brought food and sat with him and helped my mother with things around the house. I did this because he was my father and he was sick, and that mattered, regardless of the larger accounting between us. He thanked me one afternoon, sitting in the living room with a blanket on his lap and the curtains open to the winter yard. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "Yes, I did," I said. "You're my dad." He looked at me for a moment. "I think we let you down," he said. "You and Nora." I didn't answer immediately. "I think there's some truth to that," I said. He nodded. His jaw moved slightly, the way it did when he was working through something he didn't have easy language for. "We didn't mean to," he said. "I know. He stopped. Kevin needed more. I don't know if that's true or if we just told ourselves that, but that's how it felt. I thought about my father's sister calling me, about Kevin on the phone asking if I was talking to someone professionally, about my mother's hand on Marcus's shoulder while Nora stood at the edge of the room. "I know," I said again. We sat there for a while. The yard was gray and bare. A bird moved through the branches of the oak tree at the fence line. "I'd like to know her better," he said. "Nora, if she'd let me." "That's up to her," I said, "but I won't get in the way of it." He nodded. I drove home that evening thinking about what it costs to say something like that. The weight of a man in his late 60s, sitting under a blanket, trying to say he was sorry without quite being able to say the whole word. I didn't hate him for it. I wasn't sure I had it in me to hate either of them. But the distance remained. Not hostile, just honest. Nora was 15 when she told my parents what she remembered. It wasn't planned. We were at their house for Thanksgiving. We'd been going back for the past 2 years, carefully in a configuration that worked, now that Kevin's family was 4 states away and holidays had a different shape. It was a small gathering. Me and Jess, my parents, a neighbor couple my mother had grown close to. After dinner, my mother asked Nora about school. And Nora answered. She was in an honors English class. She was doing a unit on memoir. Her teacher had asked the students to write about a formative memory. My mother asked what she had written about. Nora looked at her. There was a beat, just a second, the length of a decision being made. "The school play," Nora said, "when I was 6. The table went quiet in a particular way. "You were in a play," the neighbor woman said warmly. "I had a small part. I was a rabbit." She kept her eyes on my mother. "I saved seats in the 3rd row. I was really excited. I'd been practicing for weeks." My mother had gone very still. "I looked for you when I came out on stage," Nora said. "In the dark, I found Dad and Mom, and then I looked at the seats I'd saved, and they were empty." She said all of this without visible emotion, the tone of someone recounting a fact, which was more devastating than anger would have been. "You told me it was because of Marcus," she said. "A soccer thing." Nora, my mother's voice was careful, fragile. "I'm not angry," Nora said, and I believed her, which was the most remarkable part. "I just think about it sometimes. That was the first time I understood that you were two different kinds of grandma. To them and to me. My father looked at the table. My mother's eyes were wet. I remember the Christmas when I was 7, Nora continued. She was looking at her plate now. The gift bag, I remember asking Dad if you forgot about me. She paused. He said no. I could tell he didn't know what to say. We're sorry, my mother said, the word coming out at last simply without architecture around it. Nora, we're so sorry. Nora nodded. I know, she said. She picked up her fork and continued eating. And I sat at that table in the particular stunned quiet that follows an irrevocable thing, watching my parents reckon with what a 15-year-old girl had just said to them in a voice so composed it offered no handhold, no anger to push back against, no tears to console, just the flat, clear accounting of what she remembered. My mother cried quietly for the rest of the meal. My father did not speak much. The neighbor couple talked about something else. Gently, the way kind people do when they understand that a room needs covering. On the drive home, I asked Nora if she was okay. Yeah, she said. I've wanted to say that for a long time. How does it feel? She thought about it. Small, she said. I thought it would feel bigger. I nodded. That's usually how it goes, I said. She leaned her head against the window and watched the dark highway go past. The years after that were quiet in the way that healed things are quiet. My parents tried. I want to say that clearly because it matters. They tried in the way that people try when they understand the trying is necessary and may not be enough. My mother remembered Nora's birthday. She came to her high school graduation. She sat in the gymnasium without being reminded, and she found us in the crowd, and she hugged Nora and said she was proud of her. Nora hugged her back. It was not a warm hug. It was not a cold one either. It was the hug of a young woman who had decided to leave a door ajar without walking through it. Kevin's kids were teenagers by then. They called my parents occasionally, texted on holidays, visited once a year if schedules allowed. The grandchildren who had consumed so much, so many Saturdays, so many summers, so many Christmas mornings, had grown into people with their own lives and their own schedules and their own priorities, as teenagers do. My mother mentioned this once, not as a complaint exactly, more as a bewildered observation. They're just so busy, she said. Yeah, I said, kids get busy. She heard what I didn't say, or maybe she didn't. I had stopped needing her to. Nora graduated from college on a Saturday in May. We drove up the night before, a hotel near campus, dinner at a place she'd chosen, the four of us. Me and Jess, Nora, and her boyfriend. A quiet, thoughtful young man named Sam who had figured out the quickest way into my estimation, which was to listen more than he talked. The ceremony was in the morning, under a white tent on the main lawn, 300 graduates in gowns the color of the school's colors. It was warm and slightly humid, and the speeches were too long, and I didn't care about any of that. I watched Nora walk across the stage. She had my dark hair. She'd always had my dark hair, and she walked with the particular ease of someone who knew what they were doing, who had been doing it for 4 years and was not surprised to have arrived here. She shook the dean's hand. She turned and found us in the stands. She found us the way she had always found us, that unerring instinct. She grinned. After the ceremony in the milling crowd on the lawn, she found me first. She hugged Jess, hugged Sam, and then she came and put her arms around me, and I held on for a moment. Thank you, she said. You did it, I barely. Not for that. She pulled back and looked at me. For the other stuff. I didn't ask her to specify. I knew what the other stuff was. It was the Saturday mornings I drove her to drawing class. The hot chocolate after the school play. The years of choosing, quietly and without announcement, to put her somewhere safe. The times I had looked at my parents and seen clearly and not looked away, even when looking away would have been easier. The times I had refused to let her believe that love was something you had to earn. You're going to be great, I said. She rolled her eyes in the way she'd been rolling her eyes at me since she was 12. And then she grinned again and went off to find her friends. I stood on the lawn with Jess beside me, the crowd moving around us, the tent filtering the May light into something warm and directionless. You good, she said. Yeah, I said, I'm good. And I was. My parents thought they were choosing between grandchildren. What they were really choosing was which family they were willing to lose. They chose the one that felt easier, the one that required less effort, less intention, less of the particular work that loving someone who isn't exactly convenient sometimes demands. They chose the path of least resistance, the way people often do when they aren't paying attention to what they're giving up. And by the time they understood what the choice had cost them, by the time they sat at a Thanksgiving table and heard a 15-year-old girl describe, in a voice without trembling, what she remembered. The choosing was already done. It had been done on a Christmas morning, in a question asked by a 7-year-old in a red dress. Did Grandma forget about me? She had not been forgotten. She had been deprioritized, set aside, measured against cousins she hadn't asked to be measured against, and found not lesser but less convenient. That is a different thing than forgetting. In some ways it is worse. But she grew up knowing she was loved, not by everyone who should have loved her, but by the people who showed up, who drove her to drawing class, who saved her hot chocolate, who stood in the gymnasium in the dark and made sure that when she looked out from the stage, there was always a face looking back. That was enough, more than enough. It was, in the end, everything.